Today we are digging into what many experts are now describing as a crisis, the mental health and well-being of children and adolescents. I'm Dr. Mallika Marshall. According to the World Health Organization, suicide is the fourth leading cause of death among 15 to 19-year-olds. And the number of young people looking for help for anxiety, depression, and a host of other challenges is growing. Today we brought together two experts and a college student to dig into the crisis and discuss what we can do about it. First, we have Dr. Blaise Aguirre, the head of dialectical behavior therapy for children at McLean Hospital. We also have Ellen Braaten, executive director of the Learning and Emotional Assessment Program at Mass General. And of course, to give us the point of view of young people who are living through the challenges of the pandemic, we welcome Lainey Johnson, who's a senior at Boston College. So, Ellen, I want to start with you. When talking about kids and teens and young adults, how big of a problem is mental health in this country? And tell us a little bit about what you're seeing in your practice.
So it's a big problem. Before the pandemic, we were seeing increased rates of anxiety and depression that we were trying to figure out. And since the pandemic, that has only increased. Add to that also the social isolation of the pandemic, which leads to depression and anxiety in many of us. And then also the fact that kids have been out of school, out of practice of being in social relationships, so that support system that was there before doesn't always exist for everyone. And the fact that they haven't been involved in school in academics, and we're finding that many kids are behind, which also just adds another layer of stress. What I'm seeing in my practice are kids who seem to lack, for lack of a better word, stamina. They don't quite have that stamina that they used to have. And I think part of it is this shared trauma of being in a pandemic, and also, again, this lack of the social isolation that we've all experienced.
So we'll dig into that a little bit more, but I want to get to Lainey. Lainey, you basically have been a pandemic college student. You said that it was your freshman year when you were sent home because of the pandemic?
Yes, it was the spring of my freshman year.
And so what has the past 3.5 years been like for you?
I'm an out-of-state student, so I'm originally from Kentucky. So when we got the notification that we needed to go home in March of my freshman year, I immediately got on a plane and went back to Kentucky and stayed there until my sophomore year when we got to come back to the dorms. But we pretty much had to stay in our rooms the majority of my sophomore year. I had 1 day a week where I got to go to classes in person. And at BC, the dorms are all doubles, so you share a room with someone. So for all of sophomore year, my roommate and I were doing classes online from our rooms with the other person in the room, which is a really interesting setup.
What did that do to your mental health, the mental health of your roommate and some of your friends?
It was very difficult because we were very isolated and we weren't getting to experience the things that we came to BC hoping to experience and we came to college hoping to experience. So we didn't get Marathon Monday, we didn't get an entire season of college football, and we also just didn't get to go out and meet people, and there really just was no opportunity for us to practice our social skills and develop the way that most college kids throughout history have been able to do. And it was also difficult academically because you're transitioning to a completely different way of learning, and especially in terms of online classes. One of the most difficult things with that is that every class was different. So before the pandemic, you go to lecture during your assigned time. You have tests on the day that you have class. But with the pandemic, we started to have some classes asynchronous, so you could do it whenever you wanted to. We had some classes where you had to be on Zoom at certain times. We had exams that were online, so they could be whenever the professors decided that they should be, so not during class time. And that was very difficult to adjust to, and a challenge academically and also mentally, because you're trying to get so much information and match up so many different things that are just not, you've never had any experience doing before, and you're in a situation where you also don't have that outlet of getting to go meet people and going and doing fun things on the weekends.
So in many ways, a lot of things were sort of stunted because of the pandemic, including your emotional development.
Yes.
But you also had to learn new skills that many of us had to learn in order to try to learn something during that time. That must have been very, very difficult.
Yeah.
Dr. Aguirre, you've given me permission to call you Blaise from here on out. So Blaise, anxiety seems to be a big problem. I have 3 teenagers. My youngest, who's 13, had a lot of school-related anxiety once they finally went back to in-person learning. Are you seeing a lot of anxiety in your practice, and do you blame the pandemic for much of it?
Well, 2 things. First of all, can we give Lainey a degree in mental health? Because, I mean, you know, that it's a deep insight into, you know, the toll that this has taken and the impact that it's had. And, you know, I think that understanding some of that also points us to where we need to go. So just in terms of anxiety, we are seeing a lot of anxiety. And you know, children and teens learn by constant interaction with teachers, with other students, and over time that helps to develop resilience. When we removed people from that, at a time when the brain is developing to understand social connections, to overcome difficulties, we take them away from that for a couple of years, throw them back in. It's not unreasonable to expect that they don't have the skill set to do that. So we are seeing, what do I do? And what do I do is fear, and fear is anxiety. So it's not that unusual, and we're seeing a tremendous amount of anxiety.
More anxiety than depression, or a combination?
You know, here's the thing is, and again, people are so desperate for mental health care. I don't know in an absolute way if it's increasing or not. I think it's increasing. I think that the numbers will show that it's increasing. The phone calls to my office are increasing. My neighbors know I'm a psychiatrist. They knock on my door and they say, I've got a kid who's worried. So now I'm telling them I'm not a psychiatrist anymore, you know. But we're definitely seeing, you know, trips to the emergency room for general health have stayed more or less the same. But for mental health have nearly doubled in some cases. So I think that the numbers are starting to point out that young people struggling with mental health, anxiety, depression, and other things like suicidality, self-injury are definitely increasing.
You know, we have a lot of other things going on in the world, not just the pandemic, and it seems to really be hitting young people hard. Do you find that you and your friends are worried about things other than the pandemic, the environment, the war in Ukraine, politics? We've got midterm elections coming up. Many of you all are now eligible to vote. Like, are there other things that are weighing on your mind other than struggles with the pandemic?
Yes, there's a lot going on in our world, and I think that's really adding to how anxious my generation is, and college students in general, because we are coming into the age where we're becoming active participants in society. We can vote, and we can use our voices for whichever way that we want to, and it's a lot of pressure, and it's a lot of responsibility, and it's something that every generation has dealt with. But you have that added aspect of, we're trying to figure out how to exist in the world the way it is, like physically and mentally. And so, you know, when we're dealing with climate change and we're dealing with a lot of issues with politics in our country and across the world, it's a lot of extra added stress, and it's very kind of difficult to figure out how to get your bearings and kind of do what you need to do in terms of being active in our communities, as well as taking care of ourselves, which is a really delicate balance, and it's something that's very, I think, difficult for anyone to kind of figure out how to have, but it's very difficult for college students right now because of kind of the state of the world in terms of the pandemic too.
So I think we've sort of established that there's an epidemic of mental health issues in this country, especially for young people. Let's talk about access to care. We know that prior to the pandemic, there was a lot of difficulty for adults and kids to actually gain mental health services in Massachusetts and around the country. It seems like because the need is even greater and we have a shortage of providers, it's an even bigger problem. Is that what you're experiencing as well?
Absolutely. Before the pandemic, the research showed that about 50% of people who needed mental health care got it. So that meant that 50% did not get it. I do think it's probably greater, and I'm seeing the same sorts of things that Blaise is. Anecdotally, I'm the busiest I've ever been in my life for the last 2 years, and everyone in our field really, we could spend all day just triaging people who are seeking help, and it's a very big problem. We've got to sort of start to think outside the box because there aren't enough people to care for all of those who need those mental health services.
And even though a lot of people can do therapy through Zoom, it still is not filling the void, is it?
It isn't. I think this does open up some areas. There are some programs, there are some places that are allowing therapists to see people outside. They're being licensed in other states, but if you're not in that state, and I know that you had some of these experiences because we talked about this before, that you can't always access care even if something is online. It's much more complicated than we might think.
Right, so you're from Kentucky.
Yes.
You're in school in Boston. I don't know whether you received mental health services in Kentucky, but even if you wanted to sort of tap into someone that you knew or someone you've been used to out of state, there are barriers to doing that, right? What happened to you?
Yes. You pretty much can't see someone that you were not physically in the state. So for me as an out-of-state student, and this applies to every out-of-state student, you can't see someone at home and see someone here because you need a provider that you're seeing constantly, or not constantly, but consistently. So you can't see someone at home because you're not home enough to be considered consistent care, but you also then have to find someone at the school you're at because that's where you are the majority of the time, which can be difficult if you don't have those connections. And it's also very difficult because then when you do go home, you're not allowed to see them because you've crossed state lines. So it adds all of these complicated factors, and it can be hard enough to ask for help, but to have to deal with all of the issues of access to care can make it even harder for people that really do need the help.
Right. I had a friend who was overseas and her daughter was coming here for school, and she had an eating disorder and had a therapist and she couldn't see, and she had to go home. I mean, she really struggled in school, so it's real. All right, so...
You know, one other thing just to that point is that one of the things I've found in the last 2 years is that therapists are people too, in case, you know, people don't. And a lot of those therapists themselves who have kids who weren't able to go to school and are struggling maybe with their own kids, a lot of mental health professionals are struggling with their own mental health as well. So then, you know, so therapists are also sometimes reluctant to take on one more person. And I think that speaks to the need for a much bigger approach than, you know, just finding one more therapist. It's impacting the entire society, therapists included.
Me too.
Yeah.
Me too. All right, so we're going to take a quick break right now, and then we'll continue our conversation. But we want to mention a new National Suicide Prevention Hotline that went live this summer and is now available for anyone who needs emergency mental health assistance. You simply dial 988 to speak with a trained crisis counselor. It's the first time in decades a new 3-digit line has been created nationwide. The system aims to reduce the risk of injury or death from someone experiencing a mental health crisis. The hotline will consist of previously existing call centers from around the country, including the Samaritans here in Massachusetts. We'll be right back.
World Mental Health Day is brought to you by InStride Health for youth ages 7 to 22 with moderate to severe anxiety and OCD.
Welcome back to our discussion about kids, teens, and young adults struggling with mental health. You know, social media is often mentioned as a contributing factor to the problems many kids have. We talked to some students at a nature center in Mattapan who say getting outdoors can free them from the all-encompassing world of the internet.
You need to have certain apps like Instagram, Snapchat, just all of those, even TikTok, which is sort of more for entertainment, just to stay updated with everything that's going on. And it's sort of all thrown at you at once, which is that connects to here because you kind of step away and you're like, okay, all of these things are like in my life right now, but at this moment we have the space to focus on climate change or nature-related issues.
So we're going to come back to our guests and talk a little bit about social media. I think we all agreed it has to be addressed, right? So Blaise, what sort of impact do you think social media is having on kids, especially in light of the pandemic and all the anxiety and issues that they're dealing with already?
Mm-hmm. You know, I think that when social media first came out, I was like, social media, terrible, like, you know, but I think we have to take a much more nuanced approach, because the fire that cooks your food is also the fire that burns your house down. So what happens is social media has been a great tool for connection. And at the same time, it's been a huge tool for disconnection, for bullying, and for other negative impacts. And one of the things that I do with the young people I work with is I will actually sometimes have them use their social media in my office. And what I say is, okay, tell me how you're feeling now. I want you to open a social media content and then tell me how you're feeling after. Do you feel more connected? Do you feel more positive? Do you feel happier? Or do you feel more disconnected? Do you feel more judged? So it's getting kids to really pay attention to the impact on them rather than saying this is good or this is bad. And maybe Instagram is good, maybe TikTok is not.
What are you finding most commonly? What do the kids say?
Well, for some of them, once they start to pay attention, they say, actually, I don't like how I feel about myself when I'm on Instagram. It's okay when I'm on TikTok, but I'm not on Instagram. So maybe I shouldn't be on Instagram. So then I say, okay, can you do intermittent fasting on Instagram? You know, and let's just see how it feels if you're off it for 2 weeks. You know, sometimes they feel I was excluded from a party. You know, fear of missing out and all of that sort of stuff. I am judged. I'm not as good-looking, intelligent, popular, etc. And on the other hand is, oh wow, I hadn't seen this person for a long time. It's really great to be connected. So it's really very carefully paying attention to what it does to you, as opposed to all good or all bad.
That makes sense, and you're right. During the pandemic, it allowed a lot of kids to sort of stay connected when they couldn't leave the house or go for play dates.
Exactly.
Is it a bigger problem among younger kids than older kids?
Well, here's the thing.
And should it be limited in younger
you
kids?
see, this is such an important point. You know, we don't let 14-year-olds drive, and then when we're getting kids to start driving, we insist that they have to take 40 hours and then with a tutor and everything like that. But then children don't have to have a license to be on social media. Mm-hmm. And we don't have people who are monitoring this, and they don't know how to use this very, very powerful tool. So I think it has, you know, I think the older you get, the more you can put things into context. The younger you are, the more naive you are. And so what might be false comes through as true to you, and it can really, really impact you. So I think that something has to be done in that, you know, in that area, and maybe it's through the schools. Maybe there has to be like something in schools that teach the dangers, the positives of social media.
Lainey, what about college? By the time kids are in college, is it still sort of having that same sort of impact, good and bad, depending on the situation and the person?
Yes, it definitely depends on the person. It depends on the situation. And I think with college, it's a little more, it is very nuanced, but it's a little more, it's kind of a gray area, because at this point, me and everyone younger than me, the people that are in college especially, have kind of grown up with social media. I think I got Instagram when I was maybe 12, and that was when it first came out. So we've grown up with this, we've seen the development, but we've also not really, our parents didn't really know what to do. They didn't know how to help us. And I do see now that they are making advancements in general with teaching kids, trying to educate parents on what to do. But with my age and with my kind of college kids in general, the first thing we're not thinking is that we need to sit back and self-reflect on what this is doing to us. We're just so into it, and we just always have been, that we haven't really been taught how to, you know, take some time and just think about what this is doing to our mental health, or what's this doing to how we see ourselves in the world. And it's a very useful thing when you can sit down and do it, but I don't think that's something we're really thinking that we need to do. And there's just so much information, so much comparison that can happen, especially with young girls, that it can be very dangerous, especially to young people's mental health if they aren't reflecting on it. And so I think there really does need to be something that happens in terms of helping people become more self-aware of, is this helping me, is this hurting me? And then having the courage to be able to do what you need to do for yourself, because there is so much pressure on people in college and people in high school and even younger to be on this app and do this and do that and participate to try to not miss out. So it can be very difficult to find a balance.
And I was just talking yesterday about how, as the holidays approach, even adults may need to take a little break from social media because everybody has the perfect Christmas tree and the perfect holiday spread, right? And you feel this pressure, even as a 50-something-year-old, to be perfect. And so I can't even imagine what it must be for young people who are still trying to navigate their way in the world. What about, in your practice, what have you experienced in terms of social media?
Similar
and its
things.
impact?
I think one of the biggest downsides of social media that both of you hit on was this sort of tendency to be overwhelmed with whatever it is. Sometimes it's overwhelmed with comparison with someone else, but sometimes it's being overwhelmed with global warming, the war in Ukraine. It's very easy to go down a rabbit hole and to have this be sort of consuming your whole, like everything that's going on for you. And so being conscious is very important. Having a very healthy sort of perspective on this social media and what is it that you're doing and why are you looking at this and what is it getting you? I think that sort of exploration is really important because I do find that it's a very big issue for lots of the kids and adolescents that I work with.
And it's hard for parents. I have 3 teenagers. They're all on social media. You can barely stop it. As the younger kids come along, they get it earlier than you let your oldest get it because it's out there and, you know, her brothers are using it. And it's sort of hard to figure out how to police it because you want to give them some privacy and some autonomy and some independence, but at the same time you want to make sure that they're not seeing stuff that's harmful.
But
so, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say that the questions that you bring up in your own therapy practice, parents can do too. We can say the same sorts of things, like, what are you doing? Like, what are you watching? Does it make you feel good? You know, those sorts of questions can be opened up to parents and other professionals.
My own kids got off Facebook because I asked them those questions. You know, I said, you know, do you feel better before or after? Is it adding to your sense of who you are and all that? And when they start to pay attention to that question, rather than me saying, you have to get off or you must stay on, it's like, you pay attention to your experience. But I think that that's the kind of engagement, you know, allowing kids to, you know, we don't know best. We think we know best as parents, but we sometimes, you know, I've realized that I know much less the older I get. So,
so these are some great tips on how to help your kids manage their social media usage. How about some other general tips about mental health? Lainey, you were saying earlier, what do you do to actually help you deal with any anxiety or stress that you might feel?
Yes, so what's really important for me is getting movement every day, and I think that's especially important for people who are in school. Because you're sitting so much, you really need to get out and move at least once a day I usually do about 30 minutes. And sometimes that just looks like going on a walk with friends. Sometimes it looks like going to the gym, but it doesn't necessarily need to be strict exercise. It just needs to be something so that you're moving and you're just taking a break from everything. I also do self-care nights with my roommates where we do face masks. We did one 2 days ago, and that's really fun. It just gives you some time to have some social interaction and just take a break from everything and just focus on doing something that only benefits you, which is really hard to do, but it's really important.
And is it helpful for you to disclose your struggles with your peers, or is that something that's still taboo?
I think it's really helpful, and I think, at least with my friends and with what I'm seeing, it's becoming a lot more common. People are becoming more willing to talk because I think it is becoming more open in general of a discussion about mental health, and it's not as taboo anymore, and I think it's really positively impacted my mental health and of my friends. So I think that's a really good step that seems to be working positively.
So Ellen, what tips would you give to parents who have a grumpy teen at home, right? I have them. But how do you know when a kid is being normal grumpy or is actually exhibiting symptoms or signs of a serious problem?
Well, when you start to see that grumpiness happen day after day after day, and it's lasting more than a couple of weeks into a month, that's when you should become worried and seek additional help. in the meantime, though, you can be opening up more discussions with your child. Like, what do you need? You seem sort of helpless right now, or you seem sort of grumpy. What's missing for you right now? And to do a lot of listening. I think we've gotten away from the experience of pleasure during the pandemic. There are so many things that we used to love doing that we weren't able to do. And we need to start to think about that and have those discussions with our kids. Like, what do you need to feel happy? What makes you happy? How do we infuse that into your life a little bit more? And for a grumpy child, that's sort of their way sometimes of saying, like, I don't like what's happening, but I don't know what to do about that. And so bringing up those discussions about, well, what are some goals then around that? How can we put that into your life a little bit more? Can be very helpful.
Blaise, what about the child who likes to stay in their room? I've got two of them, right, that you kind of have to lure out. When do you need to worry that your child is spending too much time alone? And when do you need to encourage them to get out and be more social and get some fresh air and stuff like that?
You know, the things that motivate kids, you know, the things that sort of allow them to feel that they're in control are the things that they do. So often, like when kids are in their room, they feel that they have some control of their sort of situation. And the problem is that that can be very reinforcing. And so coming out when you've been shut down for such a long time can be a scary proposition. And I think that I really like what you said about, you know, sort of getting out. And when my kids want to talk to me, I say, okay, we're not going into the dark room. Here's what we're going to do is we're going to walk around the neighborhood. And by the way, they feel better afterwards. And by the way, you don't have to call your insurance company to find out if you can go for a walk, you know. And it's interesting that, you know, I'll often get phone calls like, do you have medication for anxiety or depression? But when my friends call me, I say, yes, it's called a walk, you know. And but anyway, the bottom line is that when kids are stuck and they want to engage, because they do want to engage, and maybe I invite some of their friends over, or say, come, let's all go and do something together. Let's start reconnecting, so we can take it out of that dark bedroom online into a much more connected. And if it's not too judgmental, if it's not too insistent, if it's that open spirit of listening, kids actually do engage. It's when you're insistent, you have to do this, that they withdraw.
Well, I think that is a perfect place to end this discussion. We obviously need to try to get kids outdoors, doing some walking and doing some talking when appropriate. I'd like to thank all three of you for being here. This was a really wonderful discussion. Thank you for taking the time. Anybody out there, if you know someone who is struggling, we've put together a list of resources on where to find help on our website at cbsboston.com. Thanks for joining us.
World Mental Health Day is brought to you by InStride Health for youth ages 7 to 22 with moderate to severe anxiety and OCD.